It's been 10 years since that night, but I still think about it. I'm 45 now, settled into a predictable suburban life with my wife and kids. It's a life of safety, comfort, and routine. Exactly what I need. But every now and then, when I drive through a remote stretch of farmland or see an isolated house in the distance, I remember that night. Back then, I was 35, freshly divorced, and taking a solo road trip to clear my head. Somewhere in the middle of nowhere, my GPS lost signal and I missed a turn. It wasn't a big deal at first, but as the sun dipped below the horizon and my gas gauge edged dangerously close to empty, I started to panic. Then out of the darkness, I saw it. A farmhouse, sitting alone at the edge of a field. A single light glowed in one of the windows, and a rusty truck was parked out front. It wasn't much, but it was my only option. I pulled into the gravel driveway, the sound of my tires loud in the stillness. Stepping out, I called, "Hello? Anyone here?" The screen door creaked open, and an older man stepped out onto the porch. He looked like someone who'd been rooted there for decades. Overalls, straw hat, a weathered face etched with years of hard labor. "You lost?" he asked, his voice gruff but not unkind. "Yeah," I said, trying to sound calm. "My GPS cut out and I'm running on fumes. Is there a gas station nearby?" He looked me over, then shook his head. "Nearest station's 30 miles back the way you came." My stomach sank. There was no way I'd make it that far. "Well," he said after a moment, "you're welcome to stay the night. Got a spare room. Ain't safe driving these roads in the dark anyway." I hesitated. The man seemed harmless enough, but there was something about the isolation of the place that unsettled me. Still, I didn't have much choice. "Thanks, that's very kind of you." "Name's Earl," he said, extending a calloused hand. "Dave," I replied, shaking it. His grip was strong, his hand rough from years of work. "Come on in," he said, stepping aside to let me through. The house was old, with worn wooden floors and a faint smell of wood smoke. A rifle leaned casually against the wall near the door, and the kitchen table held a plate of half-eaten food. "You hungry?" Earl asked, nodding toward the plate. "No, I'm good," I lied. My stomach growled faintly, but the atmosphere of the house made me uneasy. "Suit yourself," he said, his tone neutral. "Spare rooms down the hall, bathrooms on the left." I set my bag in the small guest room. The room was sparse, a twin bed, a dresser, and a single window that overlooked the black expanse of fields. I stared out the window for a moment, feeling the weight of the isolation. No lights, no cars, no signs of life, just darkness. When I returned to the living room, Earl was sitting in an old recliner, a beer in hand, the TV on low. I took a seat on the couch, trying to make conversation. "Lived here long?" I asked. "All my life," he said without looking at me. "You live here alone?" "Yep." "No family?" He hesitated, his gaze fixed on the TV. "Used to. Kids are in the city now. Wife's gone." I nodded, unsure of what to say. The silence between us felt heavy, but Earl didn't seem to mind. "You get many visitors out here?" I asked, trying to lighten the mood. He shook his head. "Not often. Most folks don't take this road anymore." Something about the way he said it gave me chills, but I forced a smile and excused myself to bed. Later that night, I lay in the dark, staring at the ceiling. The house was too quiet. Every creak of the floorboards, every gust of wind outside made me flinch. After a while, I gave up trying to sleep and decided to use the bathroom. The hallway was dimly lit, the old floor groaning under my weight. As I passed Earl's room, I noticed the door was slightly ajar. I glanced inside and froze. Earl was sitting on the edge of his bed, staring at the wall in front of him. The wall was completely bare. No photos, no shelves, no decorations, just an empty, peeling surface. Earl sat motionless, his back slightly hunched, his hands resting on his knees. There was something deeply unsettling about the way he stared. His expression was blank, as if he wasn't really there. The sight sent a shiver down my spine. I quickly moved past his room, went to the bathroom, and splashed some water on my face. My hands were trembling as I turned off the tap. I tried to convince myself that it wasn't a big deal. Maybe he was just thinking or zoning out. But deep down, I couldn't shake the feeling that something was wrong. On my way back to the guest room, I noticed his door was now completely shut. I locked my door behind me and lay on the bed, my heart pounding. Just as I was starting to calm down, I noticed it, a silhouette beneath the door. Someone was standing right outside my room. I froze, my breath caught in my throat. The shadow didn't move, didn't make a sound. It was just there, waiting. I sat up slowly, careful not to make any noise. My eyes stayed glued to the bottom of the door. My mind raced. Was it Earl? Why would he be standing there? The silhouette shifted slightly, and I heard the faint creak of footsteps as it moved away. I didn't sleep after that. I sat on the edge of the bed, waiting for the first light of dawn. When morning came, Earl was in the kitchen, sipping coffee like nothing had happened. "Sleep okay?" he asked, his tone casual. I forced a smile. "Yeah, thanks." He handed me a map with the nearest gas station marked. "This'll get you there. Keep your tank full next time." I thanked him and left as quickly as I could. As I drove away, I glanced back at the farmhouse. Earl was standing on the porch, watching me go. I've never driven a back road shortcut since. Some places are better left behind. The sun was low, casting long shadows across the empty stretch of highway. It was the kind of quiet that settles into your chest, making every sound seem louder. My car hummed steadily as I drove, the air conditioner barely keeping up with the heat outside. That's when I saw him, standing by the road, a thumb extended, his backpack resting at his feet. He looked rough, worn down by the miles, but not threatening. I slowed the car and stopped a few feet past him. He jogged up to the passenger side, smiling like he'd just won the lottery. "Need a lift?" I called through the window. "If you're heading west, yeah," he replied, his voice raspy but friendly. I unlocked the door. "Hop in." He threw his bag into the back seat and climbed in, the smell of sweat and dust filling the car. "Thanks, man," he said, buckling his seatbelt. "Been out here too long." "No problem," I said, pulling back onto the road. For a while, we just talked. His name was Tom, and he said he'd been hitchhiking for years, bouncing from town to town, doing whatever work he could find. He had stories, funny ones, mostly, about people he'd met and the odd jobs he'd taken. But as the miles ticked by, something about him started to gnaw at me. Maybe it was the way he kept avoiding questions about where he was headed, or how he'd sometimes pause, like he was thinking too hard about his answers. Then there was his bag. I didn't mean to look, but the zipper was half open, and from my angle, I could see inside. A roll of duct tape, a hunting knife, rope, nothing too strange on their own, but together, they didn't sit right. "You travel light," I said, trying to keep my voice casual. "Gotta," he replied. "Can't carry much when you're walking everywhere." I nodded, gripping the steering wheel tighter. The highway was empty, no signs of life in either direction. "So what do you do?" Tom asked suddenly, turning to me. "Freelance writing," I said, keeping my eyes on the road. "That's cool. Means you can go anywhere, right?" "Yeah, pretty much. You married?" The question caught me off guard. "No, just me." Tom smiled, but it didn't reach his eyes. "That's good, makes things simpler." I felt my pulse quicken. "Simpler how?" "Less to worry about," he said, shrugging. I glanced at him, trying to read his expression, but his face was calm, almost too calm. The gas gauge was hovering just above a quarter tank. I'd need to stop soon, but there hadn't been a gas station for miles. Tom shifted in his seat. "Mind if I grab something from my bag?" "Go ahead," I said, keeping my voice steady. He twisted around, reaching into the bag. I heard the zipper slide open further, and my stomach tightened. He pulled out a water bottle and took a long drink. "Want some?" he asked, holding it out to me. "No, I'm good," I said. He nodded, capping the bottle and putting it back. But now the bag was wide open, and I couldn't stop glancing at it. The knife's handle gleamed under the faint light from the dashboard. I cleared my throat. "I'm thinking of pulling over soon, stretch my legs." "Sure," Tom said. "Good to take a break." I spotted a small dirt road branching off the highway. It wasn't much, but it was enough to get us off the main road. I turned onto it and parked a few 100 feet in. Tom got out first, stretching his arms above his head. "Man, it feels good to stand up." I stayed in the car for a moment, my mind racing. Then I stepped out, pretending to check something under the hood. Out of the corner of my eye, I saw him rummaging through his bag again. When he stood up, he was holding the knife. "Nice knife," I said, trying to keep my tone light. "Yeah," he replied, flipping it in his hand. "Comes in handy." I forced a laugh. "I bet." He took a step closer, the blade glinting in the fading light. "You know," he said, his voice low, "you seem like a good guy. Most people wouldn't stop for someone like me." I nodded, my heart pounding. "Just trying to help." Tom tilted his head, studying me. You ever think about how easy it'd be to disappear out here? No one around for miles, no one to hear anything. I swallowed hard, forcing a smile. I guess that's true. We stood there for a moment, the silence heavy. Then he laughed, slipping the knife back into his bag. Relax, man, I'm just messing with you. But I couldn't relax. Every instinct screamed at me to leave. I think I'm gonna head back to the highway, I said. There's a gas station a little ways up. I can drop you there. Whatever you want, he said, his voice casual. I climbed into the driver's seat, trying not to seem rushed. Tom followed, his bag now zipped shut. The drive back to the highway was tense. Neither of us spoke. My hands gripped the wheel so tightly they ached. Finally, the glow of a gas station appeared in the distance. I pulled into the lot and parked near the pumps. This is your stop, I said. Tom looked at me for a long moment, then grabbed his bag. Thanks for the ride, Dave. You're a good guy. Take care, I replied. I watched as he walked into the gas station. Then I floored it, speeding back onto the highway. I didn't stop until I reached a motel hours later. Even then, I didn't sleep. I kept replaying the ride in my head, wondering if I'd overreacted or if I'd narrowly avoided something far worse. Either way, one thing was certain. I wasn't picking up any more hitchhikers. Before we get into the next story, be sure to hit that subscribe button if you haven't yet. Your support makes all the difference. Thanks for watching, and let us know in the comments where you're watching from. I've been hauling freight for over 20 years. In that time, I've seen just about everything. Drunk drivers weaving across lanes, tornadoes looming on the horizon, and wildlife darting in front of my rig at the worst possible moments. But what I encountered that night in Montana, that was different. That was something I'll never forget. It started with a miscalculation. My company had botched my mileage and I was running on fumes. I radioed dispatch and they sent me coordinates for the nearest approved gas station. The problem? It wasn't anywhere close. I had to leave the main highway and take a back road, one of those narrow two-lane stretches where the darkness feels alive and pressing. There was no moon, no stars, just an oppressive blackness that swallowed everything outside the reach of my headlights. Not a single car had passed me in over an hour. It was just me, my truck, and the hum of the engine as I pushed eastward. I was maybe 20 miles down that back road when my headlights caught something ahead. At first, it looked like a lump, a shadow, maybe some debris. But as I got closer, I could tell it was something more. My chest tightened and I eased off the gas, squinting through the windshield. The closer I got, the clearer it became. It was a mangled pile of something. I slowed to a crawl, my rig groaning as I approached. When I finally passed it, my stomach lurched. I couldn't believe what I'd just seen. I hit the brakes hard, the cab shuddering to a stop in the middle of the road. My hands were shaking as I threw the truck into reverse, backing up until the mess was illuminated by my brake lights. The red glow bathed it in an eerie light, making it look even worse. I pulled the parking brake and grabbed my jacket, flashlight, and gloves. Whatever it was, I needed to know. Stepping out of the truck was like stepping into another world. The air was unnaturally still, heavy with a cold that bit through my jacket. The only sound was the faint hum of my idling engine. My boots crunched on the asphalt as I walked to the back of my trailer, the flashlight beam cutting through the dark. And then I saw it. A mangled corpse lay sprawled in the middle of the road. It was headless, skinless, and utterly grotesque. The rib cage was intact, but everything else was a chaotic tangle of bones and flesh. Steam rose from the exposed meat, curling into the night like ghostly tendrils. I froze, the flashlight trembling in my grip. My brain struggled to make sense of what I was looking at. Was it an animal? A person? The rib cage was too large for a deer, but eerily close to the size of a human. I wanted to turn around, get back in the truck, and pretend I hadn't seen it. But my legs wouldn't move. The corpse looked fresh, too fresh. There was no fur, no clothing, nothing to suggest what it might have been. Just bare, glistening muscle and bone. Finally, I forced myself to pull out my phone, my hands shaking so badly I nearly dropped it. No service. Of course. I was 50 miles from the nearest town, alone in the middle of nowhere. Swallowing hard, I shone the flashlight around, searching for, I don't even know what. Tracks, maybe? A clue? But as the beam swept the road, something caught my eye. Glowing eyes. They were on the side of the road, just beyond the fence. Coyotes. At least 5 of them, standing perfectly still, their eyes reflecting the light like tiny burning coals. Coyotes aren't unusual, but these ones didn't act right. They didn't scatter when the flashlight hit them. They didn't move at all. They just stood there, watching me. Then, one by one, they started slipping through the fence, their movements slow and deliberate. I took a step back, my boots scuffing against the asphalt. My mind was screaming at me to get back in the truck, but I was rooted in place, paralyzed by a primal fear I couldn't explain. The coyotes didn't hurry. They trotted toward me, their heads low, their eyes locked on mine. That's when I heard it, a low, wet sound, like something shifting in the pile of meat behind me. I spun around, the flashlight beam jerking wildly. The corpse hadn't moved, but the sound was unmistakable. My heart was pounding so hard I thought it might burst. Every instinct in my body screamed that I was in danger, that I needed to leave now. I didn't look back at the coyotes. I didn't try to figure out what made that noise. I just turned and ran for the truck, slamming the door shut and locking it behind me. The cab felt like a sanctuary, but even there, I couldn't shake the feeling that something was watching me. The coyotes had reached the edge of my headlights. They stood there, their glowing eyes fixed on the truck, unblinking. I threw the rig into gear and floored it. For the next 20 miles, I couldn't stop glancing in my mirrors, half expecting to see something chasing me. But the road stayed empty, the darkness unbroken. When I finally reached the gas station, I was shaking so badly I could barely grip the pump. The attendant gave me a strange look but didn't say anything. I didn't sleep that night. Hell, I barely slept the next few nights. I tried to convince myself it was a deer, a mangled carcass, stripped by scavengers. Maybe the coyotes had been drawn to the smell, and the sound I heard was just my imagination. But deep down, I don't believe that. Roadkill doesn't look like that, and coyotes don't behave like that. I still don't know what I saw that night in Montana. I don't think I ever will, but one thing's for sure, it was the creepiest experience of my entire career. And if I ever get sent down that back road again, I'll take my chances running out of gas. Camping in the mountains had always been our family's tradition. Every summer, like clockwork, we'd load up the car with sleeping bags, marshmallows, and our trusty dog Max. This was 2017, and we had 2 daughters at the time, a 5-year-old with endless energy and a 1-year-old who could sleep through anything. Our home was in a small city nestled between towering peaks, and camping trips didn't require much planning. There were no assigned campsites in our neck of the woods. You found a clearing, pitched your tent, and let nature take over. That year, we'd chosen a spot just off the main canyon road, tucked between dense pines. As we set up camp, the girls ran around, laughing and chasing each other, while Max darted between them, wagging his tail like a metronome. My husband struggled to get a fire going while I unpacked the cooler. It was a picture-perfect scene, until night fell. The mountains change after dark. The vibrant greens and warm hues of twilight vanish, replaced by a creeping blackness that wraps around you. It's not just the absence of light, it's the quiet. The kind that presses against your ears and makes every snap of a twig feel like a drumbeat. By the time the girls were asleep, my husband had already retreated into his sleeping bag. Max was curled up on his bed, nestled in the front porch of our tent, a small zippered area just outside the main sleeping compartment. I, as usual, was still wide awake. The silence didn't bother me. It never had. I found comfort in it, often using the time to reflect or stargaze. That night, though, I was restless. Something about the air felt off. I decided to sit in the car a few feet from the tent, scrolling through my phone and waiting for sleep to find me. It must have been close to midnight when Max started barking. Not as usual, I heard a squirrel bark, but something deeper, more insistent. I immediately froze. Max wasn't a cowardly dog, but he wasn't reckless either. His barking grew louder, each sharp note slicing through the night. I opened the car door and stepped into the chilly air. The fire had died down to a faint glow, casting eerie shadows on the surrounding trees. "Max, quiet," I hissed, walking briskly toward the tent. The girls were light sleepers, and the last thing I wanted was to wake them. As I reached the tent, Max stood rigid, his gaze fixed on something beyond the fire pit. His tail was stiff, his ears pinned back. I knelt to shush him, my hand brushing over his trembling body. That's when I turned to see what had him so riled up. There it was, a black bear. It stood no more than 10 feet away, its massive frame illuminated by the dim embers of our dying fire. Its eyes glinted in the faint light, and for a moment, they locked onto mine. Time stopped. I couldn't breathe, couldn't move. Every survival instinct I'd read about or seen on TV vanished from my mind. All I could do was call out, my voice shaking as I alternated between my husband's name and the word bear. Nothing. The man could sleep through a hurricane. "John! Bear! John!" My voice grew louder, more frantic. The bear tilted its head, seemingly curious. Max let out a low growl, breaking the tense silence. That small sound was enough to tip the balance. The bear turned, its massive body retreating into the darkness with surprising grace. Relief washed over me, but it was short-lived. The tent zipper flew open, and there was John, his face pale, flashlight in hand. He took one look at my expression and didn't ask questions. "Get the girls," he said in a low voice. I hurried into the tent, my hands trembling as I scooped up the baby and shook our older daughter awake. She groggily protested, but the urgency in my voice silenced her. Max was still growling, his body tense as he stared into the darkness where the bear had disappeared. "We're leaving," John said firmly, already stuffing sleeping bags into the car. The air felt suffocating as we scrambled to pack up. Every rustle of leaves, every snap of a branch made my heart race. The bear might have retreated, but we knew it could return at any moment. Finally, with everything haphazardly thrown into the car, we piled in. John started the engine, and the headlights illuminated the dark forest ahead. As we drove away, I looked back one last time. Just beyond the faint glow of the dying fire, I saw them, two glowing eyes watching us from the shadows. We didn't stop driving until we were miles away, back on the main road. My hands were still shaking as I held the baby close, her soft breathing the only sound in the car. That night, we vowed never to camp so deep in the woods again. Nature is beautiful, but it doesn't belong to us. Out there, we were intruders, and we'd been lucky to leave with nothing more than a story to tell.